Have you ever witnessed a moment so shocking, so unbelievably unjust, that the entire course of someone's life is changed in an instant? Welcome to this jaw-dropping tale of a young black girl named Liana, forced to move to the back of the plane by a power-hungry flight crew, only to discover mid-flight that she is none other than the goddaughter of the airline's chairwoman. The flight crew's arrogance knows no bounds, but karma is just around the corner. Buckle up for unexpected twists, confrontations in high-altitude aisles, and a moment of unbelievable retribution. This is the story that will leave you gasping for air. Liana's day began much like any other, despite the promise of something special on the horizon. She woke up in her tidy, peach-colored bedroom in suburban Atlanta, still groggy from staying up late, binge-watching her favorite series. A bright yellow suitcase lay open on her bed, half filled with neatly folded jeans, t-shirts, and a carefully wrapped gift. She was traveling to Seattle to visit her mother, who had been stationed there temporarily for work. Little did Liana know that this ordinary day would trigger events that would resonate across the airline world. When Liana and her father Marcus arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, they headed straight for the sprawling check-in area. The terminal was as busy as ever, thousands of travelers moving in a perpetual current of rolling luggage and coffee cups. Anxiety, excitement, fatigue, all manner of emotions buzzed in the air. Liana could almost taste the energy as she followed her father through the throng. She was already daydreaming about what she might do in Seattle, taking photographs near Pike Place Market, sampling local donuts and reuniting with her mother. They had planned a fun weekend of sightseeing before her mother's important conference resumed. But first, Liana would have to get through the crowd, the security lines, and an inevitably packed flight. Their destination, Gate F7, where Aurora Airlines Flight 708 was set to depart at 11:30 a.m. The flight time to Seattle would be roughly 5 hours, plenty of time to catch up on some homework or watch a new action movie. Security was routine, though. The line felt never-ending. The beep of scanners, the constant rummaging through pockets, and the stress of removing shoes all blended into the typical hubbub of an airport morning. Near the check-in counter, a tall, striking woman caught Liana's eye. The woman, dressed in an impeccably tailored navy suit, was accompanied by 2 assistants and spoke quietly into a phone. Liana noticed the small Aurora Airlines pin on the woman's lapel, but didn't dwell on it. Executives were always moving through major airports. She had no idea just how pivotal that woman would be to her destiny. When they reached the ticket counter, the agent greeted them with a polite smile. "Good morning. Welcome to Aurora Airlines. Can I have your passports or IDs, please?" Marcus handed over the necessary documents. He explained, "I purchased a ticket for myself and my daughter, Liana Carter, to Seattle. Both of us are here. We also have pre-selected seats 5A and 5B. These seats were right behind first class, offering extra legroom. Though Marcus could have flown basic economy, he wanted his daughter to be comfortable." As the agent typed away, Liana noticed that her father seemed a little distracted, maybe by his phone or some text message. She also noticed a slight frown forming on the agent's face. He looked uneasy, but he handed back their boarding passes with a practiced, neutral expression. "Everything is good. Enjoy your flight," he said. Yet Liana felt a flicker of something off, a sense that perhaps the agent had seen a note or a message pop up in the system. She brushed it off, attributing it to typical airport stress. They moved on, passing by a large Starbucks kiosk before they approached the security lines. Liana insisted on getting a mocha frappuccino, so they joined the snaking queue. As she waited, her father asked if she was excited to see her mother again. Liana grinned and nodded vigorously. "It's only been 3 weeks, but it feels like forever," she replied. Soon they were through security shoes, back on laptops, repacked, belts tightened. Marcus and Liana started toward their gate, weaving around families, businessmen, and couples. They passed a bustling Chick-fil-A and the constant announcements calling out boarding instructions for flights to Dallas, Chicago, and London. The faint smell of cinnamon from a nearby bakery mingled with the strong whiff of airport scrambled eggs. At gate F7, they settled in, waiting to board. A group of flight attendants in crisp teal uniforms chatted among themselves near the boarding door. Liana gave them little thought at the time, but the head flight attendant, a stern woman with a permanent scowl, would later become the face of the injustice Liana would endure. Passengers on Aurora Airlines Flight 708 to Seattle. "We'll begin boarding shortly," the gate agent announced over the PA. Liana stood up to stretch, excited to finally start the journey. She noticed her father was again peering at his phone. "Dad, is something going on?" she asked. He shook his head and pocketed his phone. "No, honey, just some text messages from a co-worker. Nothing serious." Marcus was in fact exchanging messages with an old friend who happened to work at Aurora Airlines. The friend had sent him a cryptic note, heads up some unusual remarks from flight staff. "Keep an eye out. You have priority seating, right?" Marcus tried to question him for details, but his friend wasn't responding quickly. A swirl of unease turned in Marcus's stomach. Perhaps it was nothing. Perhaps it was just a standard glitch or an unimportant note in the system. As pre-boarding for passengers needing assistance was called, Marcus and Liana waited for their group. Liana was tapping away on her phone, telling her mother she was about to board, that she'd see her soon. Across from them, a young woman with curly hair beamed with excitement, telling anyone who'd listen that she was flying for the first time. A few rows away, an older gentleman sat reading a battered paperback, ignoring the bustle. Finally, the agent announced passengers in Group 2 rows, 1 to 10. "You may board now." Marcus checked their boarding passes, Group 2. Together, father and daughter wheeled their carry-ons down the jet bridge. The hum of engines and the metallic smell of the plane interior always gave Liana butterflies. She loved traveling by plane, the sense of going somewhere new, somewhere exciting. Once inside the aircraft, they were greeted by the very flight attendant, whose scowl seemed etched into her face. Her name tag read, Estelle. She offered them a curt nod. "Seats, please," she asked already, sounding impatient. Marcus handed over their boarding passes. As Estelle studied the passes, a flicker of annoyance crossed her features. She seemed to note that they had seats in row 5, which was considered the airline's premium economy or comfort class. Estelle's lips tightened. She said nothing directly rude yet, but Liana felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Marcus and Liana found their seats with minimal fuss. The seats themselves were comfortable with extra legroom and a pleasant view out the window. Liana settled in by the window as her father took the aisle seat. She pulled out her phone and snapped a picture, sending it to her mom. On the plane, over the next few minutes, more passengers filed in. Some struggled with overhead bins, others greeted neighbors with polite nods. A mother with an infant tried to manage diapers, a stroller, and a bag of baby supplies. Estelle's scowl showed no sympathy as she maneuvered around them, shutting overhead compartments with disconcerting force. 10 minutes before departure, the flight attendants were busy making last-minute checks. Estelle walked up and down the aisle, ensuring everything was stowed properly. Then, to Marcus's surprise, she paused near their row. "You folks have your seat belts fastened?" she asked in a clipped tone. Marcus showed his belt was secured. Liana did the same. "Yes, we're good," Liana answered politely. Estelle's gaze flickered over Liana's braids, her comfortable sweatshirt, and finally lingered on her face. Something in her eyes looked disapproving in a way that felt personal. Liana felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Marcus, trying to be cordial, offered a small smile. "We're all set here." "Thank you." Estelle nodded stiffly, but instead of moving on, she leaned closer to Marcus. "Sir, I have a note in our system here that might require some seat rearrangement. Are you traveling with any special accommodations by chance?" Marcus looked puzzled. "No, none that I'm aware of," he replied. "We specifically booked these seats, and we're good." Estelle's expression soured further, as though his response were displeasing to her. "Well, she said there's some confusion. I'll check with my colleagues." With that, she turned and disappeared toward the front galley. Liana exhaled. "Weird," she whispered. Marcus shrugged, though his mind flashed to the cryptic text from his friend. But before he could say another word, the captain's voice rang out over the intercom, welcoming passengers and announcing a slight weather-related delay. They would be on the tarmac for perhaps 20 extra minutes. As the plane began to taxi, the flight attendants did their usual safety demonstration. Liana followed along, though she'd seen it countless times, and she giggled quietly at the flight attendant in the front, who tried to add a bit of flair by pantomiming the seatbelt instructions dramatically. Estelle, however, made repeated glances at them. Several times Liana sensed Estelle's eyes scanning over her row. It was unsettling, but Liana tried to brush it off. Maybe the flight attendant was simply thorough or worried about a new memo. Once airborne, the seatbelt sign was turned off. Passengers settled into their seats, some leaning back for a nap, others watching the overhead TV or rummaging in seat pockets for the in-flight menu. Liana plugged in her headphones, intending to watch a movie. Suddenly Estelle appeared again. She stood in the aisle, her arms folded, her expression grim. "I'm going to have to ask you to move," she said, looking straight at Liana. A hush fell over the nearby rows. Marcus stiffened. "Excuse me," he asked, making sure he'd heard correctly. Estelle cleared her throat. "We have a passenger in need of these seats," she said. "We need you to move to the back of the plane. There are open seats in row 28. Liana's jaw dropped. She glanced at her father, confusion swirling. Row 28 was near the very back of the aircraft. "We paid extra for these seats," Marcus argued calmly, though shock trembled in his voice. "There must be some mistake." Estelle's stern glare hardened. "It's not a mistake," she insisted. "You are required to comply with flight crew instructions. Otherwise, we can have you escorted off the plane for interfering with a crew member's duties." Her tone was menacing, leaving no room for discussion. A few passengers who had overheard the exchange exchanged wide-eyed looks. One man in the row behind them leaned forward and whispered to Marcus, "That doesn't sound right. Are you sure you have to move?" Marcus ignored the man for the moment, focusing on Estelle. "Ma'am, we have our boarding passes right here," he said, holding them up. "These seats are ours, purchased well in advance. If there's a legitimate reason for us to move, we'd like to know what it is." Estelle's lips compressed into a thin line. "I've already told you. A passenger with medical needs requires these seats. The plane is almost at capacity, so we have to place you in other seats. I can't keep explaining myself." Marcus felt a swell of anger rising, but he kept his voice steady. If a person with special needs is aboard, we would be the first to accommodate them. But typically that arrangement is made before boarding, and we'd at least be informed. Could we speak with that passenger, or confirm with the gate agent? Estelle's scowl turned into open hostility. She stepped closer, towering over Marcus. "Sir, If you do not comply, I'll have to call the air marshal or ask the captain to divert. You don't want that, do you? Liana felt her throat tighten. This was humiliating. Passengers around them whispered. Her cheeks burned not just with embarrassment, but also with an indignation that was building. She caught sight of a few curious glances, some supportive, some merely gawking. Marcus took a deep breath. Fine, he said, trying to de-escalate the situation. But I want to speak with a higher-up after we land. This isn't normal procedure. Estelle said nothing in response. She spun on her heels and marched to the galley. This is ridiculous, Liana muttered. No one else got asked to move. Marcus clenched his jaw, noticing that there were indeed a few single-seat travelers in the premium economy rows who could have been moved without splitting a family or father-daughter pair. Yet Estelle had singled them out. Marcus's mind buzzed with the possibility of discrimination. Reluctantly, Marcus and Liana gathered their carry-ons from the overhead bin. The entire scene was deeply uncomfortable. They had to walk the length of the aisle, passing row after row of curious stares. Some passengers offered sympathetic expressions, but no one openly intervened. Row 28 was cramped right by the lavatories, where the constant sound of flushing and the smell of disinfectant would permeate the rest of the flight. The seats had barely any legroom. Liana tried to wedge her backpack under the seat in front of her, wincing at the lack of space for her legs. She felt tears pricking her eyes. Her father placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, but inside he too was seething. He'd never felt so powerless. Even if they demanded to leave the plane, it would mean cancelling their trip and losing out on a visit Liana had eagerly awaited for weeks. Across the aisle, a mother with 2 small kids looked at them sympathetically. "I'm sorry," she mouthed, clearly unsure of what else to say. Just when Liana thought they might at least try to endure the flight in some measure of quiet, Estelle returned this time, with a second flight attendant in tow. "Is there a problem here?" the second attendant, a man named Jordan, asked. Marcus exhaled sharply. "We were just moved without valid reason, and now—" But Estelle cut in. "They're refusing to comply with seat instructions." "That's not what's happening," Marcus said, frustration lining his voice. "We complied. We moved here to the back. But I want to know why we were singled out." Jordan glanced at Marcus, then at Liana. He sighed and gave Estelle a wary look. "I heard something about a medical situation." Estelle nodded sharply. "Exactly." But Jordan seemed uncertain. He pointed out that they had already completed the seat reassignments, so the matter should be over. Marcus took this opportunity to speak up. "We want an official complaint filed. This is unacceptable." Estelle's eyes flashed. "You do that, sir. Meanwhile, follow our instructions if you want to stay on board." Then she and Jordan turned and headed back to the front. Liana felt as if she was on the verge of tears. She had never experienced such blatant rudeness and hostility from a flight crew. She felt singled out, ostracized, and the entire situation reeked of something beyond a simple seat change. Minutes ticked by. The plane was cruising at 35,000 feet. The tension continued to simmer like a pot about to boil over. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, trying to accommodate his tall frame in the tight seat. He took out his phone to watch a downloaded movie. That's when he noticed a notification for a text message from his friend at Aurora Airlines. "I heard something. The crew might be pulling stunts." "Sorry. Keep calm. Let me see if I can contact someone higher up. I know Ms. Veronica St. Clair, might be on the flight manifest. Don't do anything rash. Marcus reread the text. Veronica St. Clair. The name rang a faint bell. Could that be the same Veronica? Who was Liana's godmother, a close friend of Liana's late grandmother. Liana was too young to remember the details, but Marcus remembered how, at a family gathering, the flamboyant, generous Veronica had declared she'd be Liana's fairy godmother if the child ever needed anything. But was that the same Veronica? He turned to Liana. Hey, do you remember your godmother, Veronica St. Clair? He asked in a hushed tone. Liana shrugged. Kind of, I was little. She flew in from somewhere for Grandma's funeral. Marcus nodded. What if she's on this plane? Liana's eyes widened. What? Here I thought she was in Europe or something. I'm not sure, Marcus admitted. But my buddy says Ms. Veronica St. Clair might be on the manifest. And I know she's on the board of Aurora Airlines. Or something like that. Liana gave a half laugh, but it was a hollow one. Well, she's obviously not in row 28 with the rest of the peasants, she joked bitterly, glancing around at the cramped seats. A sense of possibilities flickered in Marcus's mind. If the Veronica on board was indeed the same woman who was Liana's godmother, perhaps she could intervene. But the plane was large, and they had no idea where she might be sitting. A wave of doubt washed over him. Even if they found her, would she remember them after so many years? He typed out a quick message to his friend. I think that's Liana's godmother. If she's truly on the flight, any chance you can let her know what's happening? Then he put his phone on airplane mode once more. That might be a long shot, Liana whispered. Marcus nodded. I know. But right now we don't have many options. Let's just get through this flight. Despite trying to remain calm, both father and daughter felt suffocated by the injustice. Every time Estelle walked by, Liana tried not to make eye contact. The scowling flight attendant never missed an opportunity to glare at her, or so it seemed. Unknown to Liana and Marcus, high up in the front cabin of the plane, sat a first-class passenger flipping through a magazine. This passenger was a woman in her mid-50s with impeccably styled hair, wearing a modest yet elegant pantsuit. An Aurora Airlines lapel pin shimmered against the dark fabric. This was Veronica St. Clair, chairwoman of the board for Aurora Airlines, also known as the Iron Dove, among those who worked closely with her for her blend of grace and unyielding resolve. Veronica was used to traveling incognito, not flaunting her status, and seldom revealing her controlling share in the company. She liked to experience flights much like any other passenger, to gauge the airline's service and to spot areas for improvement. She believed in management by walking around, or in this case, flying around. Today she noticed some tension among the flight attendants. She saw Estelle pass through the front cabin, a cloud of frustration trailing behind her. Veronica also recognized the younger flight attendant, Jordan, whose face was etched with worry whenever he passed by. Something was amiss. Her phone buzzed discreetly. Veronica, who had special clearance for Wi-Fi, even at high altitudes, lifted it to eye level. A message from one of her personal assistants read, "There is a passenger complaint in progress, possibly a situation of discrimination. Please observe. Any action you deem necessary is your call." Veronica's eyes narrowed. She quietly pressed the call button for a flight attendant. A third crew member, Tasha, approached. "Yes, ma'am. Can I help you with anything?" Veronica smiled graciously. "I'd like a glass of sparkling water, please. And if you can, could you let Ms. Estelle know that I'd like to have a quick word when she has a moment?" Tasha blinked, obviously not used to a passenger requesting a chat with a flight attendant by name. But she nodded. Of course. Right away. When Estelle finally arrived, Veronica looked at her calmly. I was just noticing some commotion on the plane. Everything all right? Estelle forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Nothing major, ma'am. Just some seat reassignments for medical reasons. Veronica pursed her lips. I see. I'd like to know the details. I'm aware Aurora Airlines policy usually arranges that prior to boarding, especially for premium economy seats. Estelle's forced smile wavered. Yes, well, there was a last-minute request. We had to accommodate it. The passengers in those seats were disruptive when asked to move. Veronica felt a prickle of suspicion. She had encountered flight attendants who stretched the truth or acted on personal biases in her decades of aviation experience. And everything is settled now, she asked, her tone neutral. Estelle nodded too quickly. Yes, it's all taken care of. Veronica thanked her and let her leave, but she had no intention of leaving it at that. Something about Estelle's demeanor raised a red flag. Veronica decided she would discreetly walk through the plane once the seatbelt sign was off again to get a sense of the passenger dynamics for herself. Mid-flight, the pilot's voice came over the speakers, cautioning about potential turbulence. The seatbelt sign dinged on. Passengers dutifully settled into their seats. For the next few minutes, the aircraft bounced and rattled the overhead bins, vibrating noisily. Liana gripped the armrest. She had flown often, but she never got used to the jarring drops in altitude. Marcus tried to distract her by pointing out the window where the plane soared above a sea of clouds. Kinda pretty, huh? He said softly. Liana nodded absently, her mind still on the humiliating seat change and the bitter taste of injustice. Eventually the turbulence eased. The seatbelt sign clicked off once more. Passengers resumed their activities. Some went to use the lavatory. Others motioned for flight attendants. Marcus noticed that the overhead TV screens flickered with updates about weather patterns near Seattle gray skies, and light rain awaited them. Liana tried to watch a comedy show on her phone, but her mind kept replaying Estelle's snappish tone, the humiliating walk to the back. Suddenly, a mild commotion erupted in the aisle. A passenger a few rows ahead was complaining loudly to Estelle about the food service, something about not receiving his requested meal. Estelle's voice carried, "Sir, we're out of the vegetarian option. I can't conjure one from thin air." The man scowled. "What kind of service is this? I specifically requested a vegetarian meal ahead of time." Estelle rolled her eyes. "I wasn't in charge of catering, sir. Now if you'll excuse me." She spun around and nearly collided with Veronica St. Clair, who had quietly made her way down the aisle. Veronica steadied herself by gripping a seat back. "Careful," she said gently, though her tone indicated she was not pleased. Estelle's eyes flickered in surprise. She plastered on a courteous smile. "Ma'am, we're experiencing some high passenger demands." Veronica looked at the upset passenger. "Is there an issue?" The passenger vented his frustration about the lack of his meal. Veronica nodded sympathetically. She glanced at Estelle. "Could we perhaps see if there's a spare vegetarian meal in first class, or check with another cabin? I'm sure we can do something." Estelle fidgeted. "I'll see what can be done," she muttered. Then she moved forward hastily, ignoring Veronica's pointed look. It was in that moment that Veronica's eyes drifted across the cabin, eventually locking onto Marcus and Liana in row 28. Something about them, perhaps Marcus's familiar profile or Liana's distinct smile, made her do a double take. Her heart skipped a beat as recognition dawned. Could it really be them? Veronica thought. She remembered Liana from old photos, from a time when Liana was an infant cradled in Veronica's arms. She recalled promising Liana's grandmother that she would always be there for the girl, but life had taken her across continents, and contact had been sporadic at best. Yet she had never forgotten them completely. Veronica began to move down the aisle, navigating around passengers. Her authoritative presence turned a few heads. When she reached row 28, Liana glanced up. Their eyes met, and a flicker of confusion crossed Liana's face, as though she recognized Veronica, but couldn't place her. Marcus looked up from his phone, and his eyes widened. He stood careful not to bump his head on the overhead bin. "Veronica, Ms. St. Clair." "Is that really you, Marcus Carter?" Veronica said, a warm yet amazed smile spreading across her face. "My goodness, it's been years." Liana's heart hammered. She rose to her feet, though it was cramped in the tight row. Veronica turned to her with an expression of gentle astonishment. "Liana, I hardly recognize you. You were so little the last time I saw you. You've grown into a beautiful young woman." Liana swallowed shock and relief crashing through her. This was her father's old friend, the one who had a special connection to their family. A swirl of memories, her grandmother's funeral. A well-dressed woman, comforting everyone, with a poised yet caring demeanor, came rushing back. "It's so good to see you," Liana said softly, genuinely moved. Veronica nodded, her gaze flickering to the row number. She frowned. "But why are you seated way back here?" She looked at the cramped space, the close proximity to the lavatories. "I thought you'd be in a more comfortable seat, especially for a cross-country flight." Marcus cleared his throat. "We were in row 5 premium economy, but we were asked to move." Veronica's frown deepened. Asked to move. For what reason Marcus hesitated, unsure if he should get into the details right then. But a sudden wave of emotion overcame him. He softly explained. "We were singled out by the head flight attendant, Estelle. She claimed another passenger had medical needs for those seats, but the entire interaction felt—" He paused, glancing at Liana. It felt discriminatory. The way she approached us, the threats to remove us, the public humiliation. Veronica's mouth tightened. She knew the policies of Aurora Airlines intimately. Last-minute seat reassignments for medical reasons did happen. But they were rare and typically handled with sensitivity. And from what she could observe of Estelle's behavior, something else was going on. "Wait here," Veronica said gently, touching Liana's arm. "I'll handle this." Liana nodded, her eyes brimming with relief and a bit of awe. Watching Veronica stride down the aisle with resolute purpose felt like watching a superhero step onto the battlefield. Veronica found Estelle in the forward galley, rummaging through meal trays. The flight attendant looked up, startled to see Veronica. "Ma'am, the vegetarian meal is being heated now," she said, as though that was Veronica's only concern. Veronica's expression was calm but firm. "I'm sure it is. But that's not the primary reason I'm here." She lowered her voice, though it brimmed with authority. "I understand you forced a father and daughter out of their premium economy seats. Could you explain why exactly?" Estelle's face went rigid. "Ma'am, as I explained, we had a medical passenger who required the legroom." "And is that passenger present?" Veronica asked. Estelle hesitated. "Yes. He's in row 5 now." Veronica gave Estelle a measured look. "I took a walk through the premium economy section on my way back and saw no sign of medical equipment or an obviously ailing passenger in row 5. No oxygen tank, no special brace or cast. And from my knowledge of our seating plans, if such a request was truly made, It's typically documented before boarding. I checked with the gate agent. There was no such note. Estelle's composure flickered. It was a last-minute situation. The passenger approached us as we were boarding. Veronica folded her arms. I see. So you singled out Mr. Carter and his daughter, who, by the way, I happen to know personally, to move them to the back of the plane. Was it because they were traveling on a discounted pass, or a buddy pass, or any other reason that would make them less entitled to those seats? Estelle swallowed. No. They purchased their tickets. Veronica's eyes darkened, but her voice stayed even. Then from what I can see, you had no valid reason to move them. Let's drop pretense, Ms. Estelle. If there was a misunderstanding, I suggest you rectify it immediately. Otherwise, we're dealing with a serious breach of Aurora Airlines policy. Estelle's cheeks reddened. Are you threatening me, ma'am? Because I have the authority to manage passenger seating as I see fit. Veronica gave a tight smile. I'm not threatening you. I'm informing you that I know the policies of this airline intimately, and I know discrimination when I see it. Estelle seemed taken aback. Discrimination. That's a strong accusation. Veronica didn't flinch. Yes, it is. And if you have a better explanation, I'd love to hear it. A tense silence filled the galley. Estelle's mask of professionalism cracked further. She glanced around, noticing a few of her colleagues looking over warily. Finally, she stammered, Fine. I'll see what I can do to make this right. Perhaps they can be moved back to premium economy, or even a seat in first class. Veronica nodded. That sounds like the start of a solution. Because once we land, I intend to speak with the pilot and the rest of the crew and the entire Aurora Airlines senior leadership team if necessary. In fact, she added, I suspect you're unaware of who I am. Veronica St. Clair, chairwoman of Aurora Airlines. The color drained from Estelle's face. She looked as though she might faint. Chairwoman, I had no idea. Veronica raised a hand to silence her. Precisely. And in your ignorance, you treated my family friends shamefully. I suggest you correct your wrongdoing. Estelle nodded jerkily. Yes, ma'am. Right away. While Marcus and Liana waited uncertain of what was happening up front, they tried to brace themselves for whatever came next. Liana's heart still pounded with residual anger and embarrassment. Marcus tapped his foot, checking his phone, even though it had no signal. Then, as if by magic, Jordan, the more courteous flight attendant, appeared, looking apologetic. Mr. Carter. Ms. Carter, he said, inclining his head respectfully. We'd like to move you to better seats now. Marcus eyed him warily. Is that right? Jordan winced. Yes, it's my understanding you were incorrectly reassigned. We have seats open in first class. If you'll follow me. A ripple of excitement and relief ran through Liana. She glanced at her father, who lifted an eyebrow in mild surprise. First class. Yes, sir, Jordan said, forcing a polite smile. We'd like to upgrade you both for the inconvenience. Liana grabbed her bag, and Marcus hoisted his carry-on. They followed Jordan up the aisle, passing row after row of passengers who had earlier witnessed their forced exodus. Now heads turned in astonishment as they made their way back up with Jordan leading the way. This time the walk felt entirely different. Liana held her head high, though her emotions were still a swirl of relief and residual indignation. When they reached the first-class cabin, Estelle was nowhere to be seen, but Veronica stood waiting near row 2. She met Liana's gaze with a gentle smile and turned to Marcus with a nod of reassurance. I'm so sorry you had to go through that, she said quietly. Marcus shook his head, his anger tempered by gratitude. Veronica. Thank you. I don't know what we would have done. Veronica placed a hand on his arm. You would have filed a complaint and, if necessary, taken legal action. We do not tolerate discrimination here. But I'm glad I could intervene. Please take these seats and try to enjoy the remainder of your flight. Liana's seat was plush and spacious, with ample legroom and an adjustable recline that felt like a dream compared to the cramped quarters in row 28. She sank into it, feeling both relief and a twinge of embarrassment that it had taken Veronica's intervention to correct such wrongdoing. As she settled in, a steward approached offering them drinks. Liana requested a soda, while Marcus asked for coffee. Veronica slipped back into her seat across the aisle, but not before leaning over to say, "We'll talk more after we land." "Okay." Liana nodded. Her heart still pounded, but now it was more from the shock of the abrupt upgrade than from humiliation. Over the next hour of flight, the tension in the cabin remained palpable, but now the ball was in Veronica's court. Liana tried to settle her nerves by watching a movie on the first-class screen. Marcus, however, was too keyed up to relax. He leaned over quietly, talking with Veronica whenever possible. Between sips of her soda, Liana's mind wandered back to the mention of her grandmother. She was called Harriet Carter, a formidable woman who had marched in civil rights protests decades ago. Liana felt certain Harriet would have been furious at the way Estelle had treated them. Harriet had always spoken of equality, dignity, and the importance of standing up against injustice. Liana found comfort imagining her grandmother's spirit. She envisioned Harriet cheering from beyond proud that Liana's father hadn't backed down and that they'd had the strength to confront discrimination. She also felt a renewed sense of gratitude for Veronica, who had apparently inherited Harriet's spirit of no-nonsense advocacy. As the plane began its descent into Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, the flight crew made the usual announcements about seat backs and tray tables. Liana gazed out the window, watching the patchwork of green trees and shimmering water grow larger. The soft gloom of Seattle's sky enveloped them. The wheels touched down smoothly. Passengers gave a polite round of applause, though many seemed eager to exit after the tension-filled flight. Liana noticed Estelle standing near the galley, her posture rigid, her face pale. The final taxi to the gate seemed to stretch on forever. When the seatbelt sign turned off, Veronica St. Clair stood addressing the cabin with a poised authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to request that Mr. Marcus Carter and Miss Liana Carter remain seated momentarily, along with our head flight attendant, Ms. Estelle." A ripple of surprise spread among the passengers. Jordan stood by, uncertainly glancing at Veronica. The door opened, and the ground crew attached the jet bridge. First-class passengers usually deplaned first, but Veronica stood firmly, politely directing others to step around. Confused but compliant, the other passengers exited. Some shot curious looks at Marcus and Liana, who stayed seated, hearts pounding. Finally, only a few stragglers remained. Veronica gestured for Estelle to join them in the aisle. The head flight attendant approached with evident trepidation. Marcus watched, astonished. Liana's heart hammered, uncertain about the confrontation to come. Once the aisle was mostly clear, Veronica spoke in a measured tone. "Ms. Estelle, do you recognize who I am?" Estelle nodded stiffly. "Yes, Chairwoman St. Clair." Veronica continued. "Would you care to explain your actions to Mr. Carter and Ms. Carter, and to me as well?" Estelle's eyes darted around, looking for an escape, but found none. She swallowed. "I may have overstepped. I thought I was following procedure," Veronica interjected, gently but firmly. "We both know that's not accurate. I've reviewed Aurora Airlines policy." There was no documented medical need for the seats in row 5. Instead, You singled out this father and daughter who happened to be long-time family friends of mine and humiliated them in front of the entire plane. We have reason to believe this was racially motivated." Marcus and Liana exchanged glances, feeling a mix of vindication and lingering anger. Estelle's voice shook. I accept responsibility. I was under stress, and maybe I acted inappropriately, but I never meant to." Veronica held up a hand. "I'm not here to humiliate you further. But actions have consequences. Expect a formal investigation by Aurora Airlines once we're off this plane. For now, I suggest you reflect on your conduct." Estelle bit her lip, nodding, her expression trembling on the edge of tears. Liana almost felt a pang of pity. But the sting of public humiliation and implicit racism burned too strong to muster much sympathy. Veronica nodded to Marcus and Liana. "Please, let's deplane." They gathered their belongings and stepped into the jet bridge, leaving a visibly shaken Estelle behind. Inside the bustling terminal of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, Liana spotted her mother, Naomi, who was waiting for them near baggage claim. Naomi waved excitedly, relief washing over her face at seeing Liana and Marcus safe. Liana hurried forward, throwing her arms around her mother. "It was such a crazy flight, Mum. You won't believe what happened." Naomi hugged her tightly. "Are you okay?" "Your texts had me worried." Veronica stood beside them, a protective presence. Marcus introduced Naomi to Veronica, explaining in brief that Veronica was Liana's godmother and also the chairwoman of Aurora Airlines. Naomi's eyes widened in amazement. "So you're the Veronica I've heard stories about." Veronica laughed softly. "Likewise, Naomi. It's nice to finally meet you face to face. I'm just sorry it had to be under such stressful circumstances." As they all grabbed their luggage from the carousel, Veronica excused herself to make a few calls. Marcus could overhear fragments of her conversation, words like headquarters' formal complaint and termination policies. He could only assume she was taking immediate steps to address what happened on the flight. Liana felt an odd mixture of triumph and anger. Yes, they were vindicated, and yes, they had Veronica's support. But the bitterness of having been victimized still lingered. "Mom, you should have seen how she demanded we move to the back." Liana recounted, her voice trembling with lingering fury. Naomi squeezed her hand supportively. That very evening, Marcus received an official email from Aurora Airlines, thanking him for his patronage and apologizing for the incident. They attached a voucher for future flights, offered complimentary upgrades for his next 2 round-trip journeys, and a promise of an in-depth internal review. A few days later, Marcus and Liana received word through Veronica that Estelle had been placed on indefinite leave pending further investigation. Jordan and Tasha, the other flight attendants, had corroborated the story of Estelle's undue aggression and discriminatory remarks off the record. Several passengers also filed complaints after witnessing the ordeal. Meanwhile, the passenger who had supposedly needed the medical seat turned out to be a frequent flyer with no recorded disabilities or special accommodations. His story was that Estelle had offered him a better seat, row 5, without him even asking. It became clear that Estelle had lied about the medical condition. Within a month, Estelle was terminated from Aurora Airlines. The news spread across the airline's network, and the message was clear: no act of discrimination would be tolerated, whether subtle or overt. Liana felt a measure of justice had been served. Yet the hardest blow for Estelle came when she realized the man she'd forcibly moved was not just any passenger. He was close to the chairwoman's goddaughter. Her attempt at flaunting her power had backfired spectacularly. In the end, she had lost her job, her reputation tarnished by a formal record of discriminatory conduct. For Liana, however, the lasting impact wasn't just the memory of humiliation. From the ashes of that terrible experience rose a reconnection with Veronica St. Clair. The chairwoman invited Liana to Aurora Airlines headquarters, gave her a tour of their operational facilities, and introduced her to staff members who worked in various departments. On one such visit, Liana asked Veronica bluntly, "Why do you do all this? I mean, you're so powerful. You could just sit back and let other people handle problems." Veronica smiled as they walked through a hallway lined with pictures of historical aircraft. "Because, my dear, if people in positions of power don't stand up for what's right, who will? And I learned from your grandmother Harriet that injustice thrives when good people look away." Liana felt tears welling up at the mention of her grandmother. Veronica placed an arm around her shoulders gently. "You have her spirit, Liana. Don't ever let anyone make you feel less than what you are worth." Word of the incident leaked to the press, spurred by eyewitness tweets and a couple of passengers who decided to share the story online. Major outlets like CNN and local Seattle news channels picked up the headline, albeit briefly Haitian bias, "Alleged on Aurora Airlines flight. Chairwoman intervenes." Reporters reached out to Marcus and Liana for comments. Marcus was hesitant, not wanting to become the face of an airline scandal. But after consulting with Veronica, they issued a brief statement emphasizing that Aurora Airlines seemed responsive to their concerns and that they appreciated the swift action taken by upper management to correct the injustice. Aurora Airlines also released a statement reaffirming their zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. They acknowledged an internal investigation led to the termination of the responsible employee. Online, the majority of public sentiment was supportive of Liana and Marcus. Many congratulated them for standing up for themselves. Some folks expressed cynicism, suspecting that if Veronica hadn't intervened, the outcome might have been different. But most recognized that the airline's stance was serious and admired that justice was served. Liana found that despite the initial shock and humiliation, the ordeal became a catalyst for growth. She became more outspoken about issues of social justice at her school and community gatherings. She shared her story of being forced to the back of the plane, emphasizing how critical it was to stand against discrimination, even in everyday situations. She also cherished her renewed relationship with Veronica. For the first time, she had a true godmother figure in her life. Someone who wasn't just a family friend, but also a mentor of sorts. Veronica taught her about leadership, about staying true to principles, and about leveraging whatever position one has to uplift others. Marcus, too, felt a transformation. He had always been a protective father, but this incident awakened a deeper resolve to prepare Liana for a world that could sometimes be harsh. He taught her about her grandmother's legacy, recounting Harriet's experiences during the civil rights movement and instilling the importance of never staying silent. Months later, after the dust had settled, Marcus received an unexpected letter in the mail, posted from a city in Texas. Inside was a handwritten note from Estelle. She wrote Mr. Carter and Ms. Carter. "I'm writing to offer my sincerest apologies for my behavior. I want you to know that losing my job forced me to confront my biases. I recognized I'd been holding prejudices for a long time. This is no excuse, but I realize how much pain I caused. I am deeply sorry. I've begun attending workshops on racial sensitivity and equality. I hope in time I can become a better person. I wish you and your family well." Liana felt a swirl of emotions reading the letter. It didn't undo the humiliation she had suffered, but it gave her a sense of closure, knowing that her oppressor had faced a moment of reckoning. She handed the note to Marcus, who read it with the same gravity. "Do you believe her? Liana asked softly. Marcus shrugged. Maybe. Maybe not fully. But it seems sincere enough to me. Sometimes it takes a hard lesson for people to change. In the following years, Liana often recalled that fateful flight whenever she stepped onto an airplane. The overhead hum, the flight attendant's greetings, it all triggered echoes of that day. Yet rather than fear or anger, it now sparked determination within her. She chose to see it as a reminder that the fight against discrimination was ongoing, and that she could help shape a better world. Veronica remained in close contact, attending Liana's high school graduation, and later helping her secure an internship at Aurora Airlines during summer breaks in college. Marcus and Naomi beamed with pride, grateful for the new bond formed and for the sense of justice that had come full circle. Within Aurora Airlines, Veronica continued to champion diversity and inclusion initiatives, using the incident as a case study on how prejudice can manifest in subtle ways. She made sure to underscore the importance of empathy, proper training, and accountability among the flight crew. Over time, the airline earned a reputation for being not just efficient, but also socially conscientious. And so the story of Liana's forced relocation, followed by a swift comeuppance for those responsible, became something of a legend among frequent flyers and staff alike. It stood as a powerful testament. No matter how high up you are, whether a flight attendant or a chairwoman, your actions have consequences, and justice, though sometimes slow, will eventually descend upon those who act with cruelty and prejudice. The day Liana was moved to the back of the plane was the day she found her own wings. She learned that the promise of a certain godmother and the legacy of a fiercely loving grandmother could transcend years and miles to bring justice when it was needed most. And that perhaps was the greatest twist of all. Life has a strange way of testing our strength, revealing hidden allies, and delivering poetic justice. Liana's journey from the humiliating moment of being banished to the back of the plane to the triumphant vindication orchestrated by her godmother, none other than the chairwoman of the airline, reminds us that standing up against injustice can lead to real change. It also shows that sometimes the powerful figures we think are far removed from our daily struggles can be the very ones who help us the most. If this story resonated with you, if you felt Liana's outrage and cheered for her eventual victory, please remember that your voice matters too. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more tales that celebrate courage, justice, and the human spirit. Together, let's keep these stories alive and remind the world that hope always has a seat, front and center.